We are in our series in Nehemiah, and we're going to get there in a second. Let me just add, I had the booklet of prayer. Let me just add my encouragement to engage and participate in that week of prayer. And I would say for some, prayer is a natural rhythm of life, and great. Embrace that and enjoy that. And for some, it might not be a natural rhythm or something that is part of your regular experience. And I would say give it a crack. Give it a try. Try something new. Step out in a way to come and pray together corporately. Step out in a way to pray privately by yourself if that's a new thing for you. I would just encourage that. There is a great blessing in that space. Pray also for Tom and Sue. Tom's away this weekend sharing at the OM retreat. Many of you know Neil Cummings, who's away on that as well. So do be praying for them as they meet together as a team and pray. Worship, celebrate, and enjoy some time together as a team. Open your Bibles to Nehemiah 5. And we're going to be reading from verses 1 to verses 13 or so today. So read along with me if you will. Nehemiah chapter 5. Now the men and their wives raised a great outcry against their fellow Jews. Some were saying, "We and our sons and daughters are numerous. In order for us to eat and stay alive, we must get grain." Others were saying, "We're mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our homes to get grain during the famine." Still others were saying, "We've had to borrow money to pay the king's tax on our fields and vineyards. Although we're of the same flesh and blood as our fellow Jews, and though our children are as good as theirs, yet we have to subject our sons and our daughters to slavery. Some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but we are powerless because our fields and our vineyards belong to others." When I heard their outcry and these charges, I was very angry. I pondered them in my mind, and then I accused the nobles and the officials. I told them, "You are charging your own people interest." So I called together a large meeting to deal with them and said, "As far as possible, we have bought back our fellow Jews who were sold to the Gentiles. Now you're selling them to your own people, only for them to be sold back to us." They kept quiet because they could find nothing to say. So I continued, "What you're doing is not right. Shouldn't you walk in the fear of our God to avoid the reproach of our Gentile enemies? I and my brothers and my men are also lending the people money and grain. But let us stop charging interest. Give back to them immediately their fields, their vineyards, their olive groves and houses, and also the interest you are charging them, 1% of the money, grain, new wine, and olive oil." "We'll give it back," they said, "and we won't demand anything more from them. We will do as you say." Then I summoned the priests and made the nobles and officials take an oath to do what they promised. I also shook out the fold of my robe and said, "In this way may God shake out their house and possessions of anyone who does not keep this promise. So may such a person be shaken out and emptied." At this the whole assembly said, "Amen," and praised the Lord. And the people did as they had promised. It's our passage to reflect on together this morning. It's quite a dire situation that's going on here. At first we get introduced to the situation. And the situation is pretty clear. In verse 2 we see there's this famine. There's this problem of hunger amongst the people. We also see that there's slavery in verse 5 and 6. The people they were so desperate, they were at the point of dire need that they were selling their children into slavery and able to provide food for them. They were having to sell their houses. They were having to sell their vineyards, which we might hear and go, "Oh, I guess they won't have any wine for dinner." But no, the vineyard was their place of occupation. That was their source of income. It would be like having a family business and having to sell off your family business. So there was hunger, there was a loss of income or occupation, there was a loss of house, and there was a loss of children into slavery. The situations we read, just on face value, is very dire. It's not good. This is what we consider a crisis situation, a crisis reality. Then we get introduced to the problem. The problem, as highlighted in verse 5, what makes Nehemiah so angry is that he recognizes we're of the same flesh and blood. That's the cry of the people. We're of the same flesh and blood, and yet one group of you, Jews, has stacks. And the other group of you, Jews, is in this crisis situation. With a lack of food, having to sell your children, having to sell your houses, having to sell your vineyards, right? And so there's this great disparity, and that's actually the problem that makes Nehemiah quite angry. It introduces us to this reality that we have here. So he engages this group of people, this group of Jews that are quite well off, right? And considering all circumstances, doing quite well. And he embraces them, this contrast. I imagine. There's a worldly opportunity, right? To these people that are well off, suddenly people in desperate situations are having to sell their fields. They're having to sell their children. They're having to sell, they're desperate to get food. And so generally desperation makes the value of the things would drop, right? I'm no businessman in the slightest, right? But I imagine this would be cheap pickings. Right? This is an easy opportunity. You've got some money to capitalize on that and to make the most of it. It's kind of like in the game Monopoly. Hands up if you like Monopoly, and keep your hands up if your family won't play Monopoly with you because you like it so much. Yeah, there's a few of them. Yeah, guilty. Yeah, it's a bit like Monopoly, right? You know the deal in Monopoly. You've got the early run, you've got the early momentum, you've got a cash supply, you've got a lot of houses, and the other person is struggling. They haven't got any hotels or any houses on, and suddenly, bang, they land on like a Mayfair or something like that, and they owe you, and you just go ruthless. Right? And you kick them, they're down, and then you kick them again until they're further down, and then you just grind them into the ground, and they say, I don't want to play anymore. But you say, no, the game's not over. We have to run it to its completion until you've lost everything, right? And it's hilarious. Well, it's hilarious when you're it's hilarious, I think. I'm just going to say it. It's hilarious, right? But that's Monopoly. That's a board game. At the end of the day, you walk away and you have a laugh, or you have some space. I don't know which one it will be, right? That's Monopoly. This is what was happening here in this context. They saw an opportunity to see something. They saw an opportunity to benefit themselves. As successful businessmen, as even smart businessmen, I would say, they saw an opportunity and went, yeah, this makes sense for us. We can benefit from this. Legally, nothing they were doing was wrong. They were charging interest on things, totally normal, right? They were buying fields that others were selling, totally normal. But what Nehemiah is highlighting here is to the Jewish people, they were not to gain on their worldly opportunity, but rather they were to hold to their kingdom responsibility. In Deuteronomy 23, we see the following. Do not charge a fellow Israelite interest, whether on money or food or on anything else that may be earned. Then again in Exodus 22, and this is a little bit more specific to the circumstance here. If you lend money to one of my people among you, one of my people being the Jews, among you who is needy, do not treat it like a business deal. Charge no interest. If you take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, return it to them by sunset, because their cloak is their only covering that the neighbor has. What else can they sleep in? When they cry out to me, I will hear them, for I am compassionate. So whilst they had the opportunity, legally, from a secular standpoint, totally within their rights to do what they were doing. Nothing wrong with it, nothing underhanded about it, nothing dodgy about it. Nehemiah is calling them back to the Torah to say, hey, we've actually got a kingdom responsibility here that supersedes our worldly opportunity or our worldly rights that we could claim. What's the problem for Nehemiah? I know that's a little bit small, I apologize. But what's the problem for Nehemiah? The problem is this. Verse 9. And you look at it at first and you get a little bit confused. But verse 9 he says, you lack the fear of our God. That's the underlying heart problem going on here. All this is happening in the external, and Nehemiah points into the internal of the people, these people over here, and he says, you lack the fear of our God. Down in verse 15, we'll see this next week, he repeats that again. What do we learn from this? Does anyone have a coin? Anyone with a coin? Lemo's got a coin for me. Thank you. I'll keep that for later. No, has anyone got a $50 note? Anyone got a coin? Okay, so what's going on here, right? If you think about your treatment or of your brothers and sisters in the faith, or in that time your treatment of the Jewish people as the Queen Elizabeth side of the coin, and you think about your love and your fear of God as the kangaroo and emu side of the coin, right? They're different, but they're two sides of the same coin. You can't split a coin. And so what Nehemiah is saying here, he's saying, you lack a fear of God. Yeah, which is pick a side of the coin, right? You lack a fear of God. How do I know that? Because I look at the other side of the coin. You're not treating your brothers and sisters right. You're not treating your fellow Jews right. You're not holding to your kingdom responsibility. And that shows to me, when I see that, I know that you fear God. Or you don't fear God, rather. Right? It's actually two sides of the same coin. You can't kind of split them down the middle. The other way to look at it would be to take a stool, and it's got 3 legs. I would rather it had 2 legs. That would make my analogy make better sense. But imagine sitting on a stool, right? And to take out, you take out the love for another person and your need for another person. What Nehemiah is saying is that stool would fall over. Yeah, you can't have the fear of God and the love for others as separate. They must go together. And to Nehemiah, that's the problem. He says, you don't fear God. Because if you fear God, you would see this situation. If you're in an opportunity to do something about it, you would. You would hold to your kingdom responsibility. The last illustration up there is like those kids' balls that you see, where you can't actually recognize where one strand ends and the other starts. Like it's just one, like try to separate them. They've got colors, that's cheating. But try to separate that ball. And he's saying, no, the love of others and care for others in need is actually intrinsically connected with our love and our fear of God. The two are mutually inclusive of one another. And Nehemiah is saying these people are trying to separate them, and that doesn't work. That is not okay. Here's a couple of passages that help us, right? Proverbs 19:17. And what I've done, the red here is our care for those in need. And the blue here is what the reflection is of our relationship with God. And so we'll see the two actually work together quite closely. And this is a very small list. I was struck when I kind of started looking into this, how many passages there are that go to this. Proverbs 19:17. Whoever is generous to the poor, right, this side of the coin, lends to who? Well, you would think to the poor, right? Of course, they do. But also lends to the Lord. Whoever is generous to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will repay him for his deed. The two work together. Hebrews 13, verse 16. Do not neglect to do good and to share what you have. Right? Do not neglect to do good and share what you have. For such sacrifice is pleasing to the person you do good to. Of course it is. But also to God. Galatians 6:2. Bear one another's burdens. Right? And as you bear one another's burdens, you fulfill God's law. 1 John 3:17, but if anyone has the world's good and sees his brother in need, yet he closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? Do you see how the two work together? You can't separate them. That's not how God designed for it to be. Or on the flip side of that last one, how do we know God's love abides in someone? Well, when they see someone that has someone has the world's good and sees a brother in need and opens his heart to him and serves him, right? That would be a way to see that God's love abides in them. Or one of my actually most favoritist passages is that Matthew 25 one there. The passage kind of has this structure, if you're familiar with it. It's the parable of the sheep and the goats. It's a parable about the end time judgment. And Jesus is saying in that end time, when he's sitting there on the throne, he will say the following. For I was, this is Jesus speaking, for I was, are you familiar with the passage? For I was hungry, for I was thirsty, for I was naked, for I was in prison, for I was a stranger, for I was, there might be a sick, right? For I was, ... And you, so for if I was hungry, you would feed me, right? For if I was thirsty, you would give me something to drink, right? For if I was sick, you would care for me. For if I was in prison, you would visit me. For I was a stranger and you welcomed me in. That's essentially what the passage says. And the people hearing that in this parable kind of respond to Jesus and they go, but Lord, when have we seen you hungry and we fed you? And when have we seen you thirsty and given you something to drink? And when have we ... And we sitting here today would ask that. I've never fed Jesus. I've never given Jesus something to drink. I've never visited him when he was in prison. I've never welcomed him into my home in a literal kind of sense. But he says, no. Whatever you did for the least of these, in other words, whatever you did for those in need in my family, whatever you did for my children, it was as if you were doing it for me. And so a helpful exercise, we did this at youth on Friday, we did on Wednesday with the Arnotts too. We actually wrote a list of all the needs that we could think of that we kind of regularly come across. For I was, so we wrote hungry, thirsty, in prison, sick, ... But then we also thought about what other ones are kind of, if Jesus was in our day talking. For I was anxious, for I was lonely, for I was terrified, for I was overwhelmed, for I was overworked, for I was exhausted, for I was... you could kind of fill in the blank. And then we went, well, what would the flip side of the bat? And you ... For I was exhausted and you offered to do the dishes for me. For I was lonely and you gave me a phone call to check in on me. For I was anxious and you gave me a hug and just sat and listened to me. For I was overwhelmed and you prayed with me. And the exercise was quite simple, to look at the relationships that we have and to go, okay, if we look at this list of needs, what are the ways in which we can engage with that space? And probably many of us actually already do a lot of those kind of things. But it was to make a conscious decision to go, in my relationships, with my family, with those I live with my employees, with my boss, with my friends, with my church family, whatever it might be. To look at that list, for I was ... and go, where are the needs that I can serve? And they're often really, really kind of simple little ways that mean a whole lot. Pick up the phone, or check in on someone, or cook an extra meal, or something like that. Anyway, that was the exercise we gave to the youth. Feel free to do that. We don't have time to sit and do that today. For I was ... and you ... Whenever you did it for the least of these, my brothers, you did for me. I think it's one of the most remarkable passages in Scripture. When you did it for another, it was as if you were doing it for me. And I think about it, if Jesus walked in that door, he wouldn't, there'd be trumpets and it'd be quite remarkable. But if he walked in, I'd say, come back for lunch, Jesus. Yeah? I'd say, oh, do you want a cuppa, Jesus? Tell me, I'll sit down and chat for him. Whenever you did for the least of these, you did for me. The problem that Nehemiah highlights is that you guys lack a fear of God. I know that because I see, we're of the same flesh and blood, verse 5. I see need in my brothers and you're ignoring it. In fact, you're taking opportunity of them. You're taking advantage of them when they're in their need. You're doing the exact opposite of what you're called to. Here's a quote. The one who walks in the fear and love of God recognizes that all they have is a gift. To truly walk in a love of God and truly walk in a fear of God comes to that reality that, man, everything, that breath is a gift. These words are a gift. These relationships are a gift, right? The one who walks in the fear and love of God recognizes that all they have a gift. And this frees them, right? When something's been given to you, you don't kind of cling to it tightly. You don't have that sense of entitlement. This frees them to walk in a generous spirit towards others. because they're no longer trying to cling to the building up of their own kingdom, as we see here in Nehemiah, but rather they're seeking to build up the kingdomly kingdom, or the kingdom of God. Our response, as we sit in a place of worship, right, that gives us an appreciation of the fear of God. It gives us appreciation of the love of God. And I would say those two things are together, but that's a separate message, right? But as we sit with this fear of God and this love of God, the overflow of that ought be a spirit of generosity. And when I'm talking about a spirit of generosity, I'm not purely just talking money. Right? And I remember a dear friend talking about this one day. Her goal for the year was to be more generous. Kind of each year she sits with God and goes, God, what do you want me to focus on this year? I want to be more generous. And I went, oh, that's great. You mean, so you're going to give more? She went, yes, but also I'm going to be generous with my words. I'm going to look to encourage people, right? I'm going to demonstrate a spirit of generosity in my words. I'm going to demonstrate a spirit of generosity by giving people the benefit of the doubt. You know, if someone rocks up late for the meeting, I'm not just going to assume straight away that they're a lazy sod and didn't get out of bed, right? Maybe something happened, and maybe that's worth listening to. Maybe something's wrong, or maybe they were just late, and that's okay. I'm going to demonstrate a spirit of generosity. I'm going to generate a spirit of generosity with my time. And so, you mean, on lunch where I could sit and just be in my own world, say, this is my time, I'm going to look to engage with my colleagues. I'm going to demonstrate a spirit of generosity with how I spend my finances. I'm going to demonstrate a spirit of generosity. I'm going to demonstrate a spirit of generosity, right? That's what we're called to do, to be generous. A spirit of generosity. The other thing worth noting in this passage, but before we wrap up, is that there were those in the community, and the reality of a broken world is this is the case. There were those that had deep needs, and they raised it. They flew the flag. They said, hey, I need help. That's part of what it means to be a community. And so I'd say to you this morning, if you're sitting there and you go, man, that whole list of for I was, you mean, I feel like I tick all of them, and you're calling me to be more generous towards others, maybe for you, actually, the call today is just to say, hey, I need someone to pray for me. I need someone to just sit and listen to me. I need someone to help me around the house. And actually, your response is to just kind of make that known to people in your life group, to people sitting around you, to the leadership of the church as what's happened here. So that's just worth flagging too. But for you that are sitting there and go, actually, I have the capacity. God's given me this gift of this capacity right now to be generous. What does a spirit of generosity look like for you this morning? Here's a couple of passages to finish with. So then, as we have the opportunity, and there are plenty of opportunities, let us do good to everyone, and especially to those who are of the household of faith. What would it look like this week for us to do good, to encourage those in the household of faith? And then 1 Timothy 6, as for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share. I like that phrase, ready to share. It's a good heart posture. Thus, as they're ready to share, they'll store up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that it may take hold of what is truly life. What does a spirit of generosity look like for you this week? Let's spend a moment to pray and to contemplate that reality. Father, I thank you as I look around. I see many, many faces and people who have been generous to me and to my household, and I am thankful for that. I'm thankful that I see, as I think about not just my experience, but the experience of those that I'm aware of, I see this spirit of generosity manifest. And that is a reflection of our love for you. The Gospels will remark, how will they know that we're your disciples? How will we evangelize to the world? How will they hear about Jesus? By our love for one another. Father, I want to ask you to help us, recognize the opportunities before us that you're inviting us into. I want you to consider that question. What's the opportunity this day, this week, for me to manifest or to me to express, to overflow a spirit of generosity? Who do I see in need that I can encourage, that I can help, that I can serve, that I can wash their feet or wash their car or whatever that act of service might be? Help us be generous people, Father, I pray. In Jesus' name.